I should have walked past that courthouse door. God knows my life would have been simpler if I hadn't heard that baby cry. But I did. And everything that followed is the price I pay for stepping inside. Snow hammered the windows when Lydia Hale clutched her 4-month-old against her chest, standing on an auction block that should never have held a mother. The judge called her lot property, the baby burden, and the men below raised their hands like they were bidding on cattle instead of a life. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just whispered a prayer that someone, anyone, would claim the child before the law tore them apart. Miles Callahan shoved the courthouse doors open then, boots dripping snow, eyes locked not on her, but on the infant's trembling fist. In one breath he shattered the sail, broke the room's silence, and doomed them all to the fight that would swallow the whole valley. He hadn't meant to speak, hadn't meant to lie. But the words fell anyway, hard as a verdict. That child is mine. They believed him. That was the twist he hadn't prepared for. If this story shakes something awake in you, hit subscribe, stay until the very end, and comment the city you're watching from. Let me see how far this tale travels. The baby's cry split the cold air before the gavel ever struck. 4-month-old Noah clung to the torn shawl around his mother's shoulder, tiny fingers gone stiff, breath a thin ribbon of white rising toward the courthouse rafters. Lydia Hale tightened her hold, knuckles bone white, feet bare against the warped wooden floor. She didn't dare blink. Blinking meant giving these men one thing she couldn't afford: fear. Lot 12, the auctioneer barked. Woman, 24, infant included. The crowd shifted like cattle restless in a storm. Boots scraped. A chair tipped. Someone laughed. Sharp, mean, cutting through the Christmas morning quiet that should have belonged to a church bell somewhere far from here. Step forward, girl, Judge Pritchard ordered, tapping his gavel like a man keeping time with the devil. Lydia didn't move. Noah whimpered. She swallowed the sound rising in her throat. A hand shoved her shoulder. I said step forward. She stumbled one step, then another. The rope railing bit her wrist as she caught herself. Outside, wind slammed against the courthouse doors hard enough to rattle the hinges. A blizzard building strength. No mercy in sight. God, if you're still listening, I should have run last night. Vance Kerrigan leaned against the front pew, smirking like he owned the sunrise. Judge, separate the babe if she's too stubborn. Infant'll fetch better in a different house. The room stirred. Heads nodded. A few whispered prices as if Noah were a mule ready for trade. Lydia's spine snapped straight. No. It tore out of her before she could swallow it. Noah jerked at the sound. She pulled him close, his cheek freezing against her collarbone. Quiet, girl, the judge warned. But she wasn't quiet. She was desperate. And desperation was louder than fear. Terms final, Pritchard said, lifting the gavel again. Bidding starts at... The courthouse doors blew open like God himself had kicked them wide. Snow whipped in, wild and stinging, riding the coat of a tall man stepping out of the storm. Miles Callahan didn't speak at first. He just stood there, frost on his beard, hat dripping meltwater, eyes cutting through the room until they found the woman clutching her child like her last breath. Then he spoke. Auction still open? Half the room turned. The other half stiffened as if winter itself had walked inside. Sheriff Grady hesitated. Miles, this ain't your business. Miles dropped a leather pouch heavy enough to thump the judge's desk. "It is now. Call the bid proper." Vance's smirk wavered. The judge cleared his throat. "We already started." "Then start over." Miles's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Unless you're afraid the territory would like to hear how you bundle infants into property law." The judge's hand froze mid-air. Lydia couldn't breathe. Noah's cry softened into a whimper. Snow hissed against the threshold like it wanted to swallow the entire building. Miles nodded once. "Begin." The judge licked his lips. $20. "40, someone called behind Lydia. 50, 60. The numbers climbed fast. Too fast. Lydia's heart punched her ribs. Noah trembled against her. Every bid felt like claws dragging her closer to a future she wouldn't survive. Then Vance lifted 2 fingers. 70. Mother only. Infant goes elsewhere. A murmur rippled through the room. A man whistled low. Another said, "Good price for a worker." Noah let out a thin cry, hoarse and small. Lydia's knees nearly buckled. "Please, don't take him." The judge shrugged. "Law allows division of—" "Enough!" Miles stepped forward, boots echoing in the hush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for a gun. He just said one sentence, steady, dangerous, every word nailed into the floor. "That child is mine." A breath. "I'm Dad." The silence that followed was alive, sharp, disbelieving. Sheriff Grady blinked. "Miles, what are you saying?" Miles didn't look at him. He looked at Noah, frozen cheeks, trembling lip, then Lydia, whose breath jammed somewhere between her heart and throat. "You heard me." Miles set another heavy pouch on the table. 150. Mother and child. Not up for separation. Not today. Not ever. Vance stepped forward, red with fury. "You can't, Judge," Miles cut in. "You separate them, and I file with the territorial circuit before nightfall. Merry Christmas." The judge's jaw worked, trapped between greed and fear. Finally, he slammed the gavel. "Sold! Mother and infant, together!" Noah startled. Lydia's breath escaped her in a broken rush. Miles turned slightly toward her. Not touching. Not crowding. Just close enough for her to hear him through the storm still raging outside. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Keep standing. We're not done yet." And Lydia, barefoot, frozen, cornered by men who'd priced her soul, felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not safety, not hope, but movement. Like the story had just changed direction without asking her permission. "Lord, don't let this be another trap." The judge hadn't even set the gavel down before Vance lunged forward. "Separate 'em anyway," he snapped. "Law says the infant's a burden, not subject to sale." He reached for Noah with 2 fingers, like the child was something sticky he didn't want on his gloves. Lydia twisted away so fast, the hem of her skirt tore on the rail. Noah wailed, face red against the cold air seeping through the warped windows. Sheriff Grady shifted uneasily. "Judge, we ain't done that since nobody fought it," Vance spat. "Take the babe." The room tensed. Even the storm outside seemed to press its ears to the wall. Miles didn't move at first. He just watched Vance's hand hang there in the space between intention and sin. Then he stepped forward. 1 step. Boot on wood, a sound like judgment. No one touches him. Vance laughed, a brittle sound. You buying the woman, Callahan, not the brat. Miles set his jaw. Then hear me clear. His voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It simply cut. I'm Dad. The words pushed the air out of the room. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered a curse. The judge blinked twice like he'd been slapped. Lydia froze. Her fingers tightened around Noah's back until her knuckles turned the color of frost. She didn't look at Miles. Couldn't. Fear had weight, and it pressed her ribs inward. Inside her head, a single thought struck like flint. Don't make promises with my child. I've heard lies before. Judge Pritchard cleared his throat. Miles, is this an admission of paternity? Because if so, it's an admission that you're not taking the child. Miles placed both hands on the desk, leaning in. Snowmelt dripped from his sleeves. Record it. Mother and infant stay together. That isn't how the statute works, the judge sputtered. Miles's eyes didn't waver. Then change it today. The judge stiffened as if someone had yanked his spine. You threatening the court? Threatening? Miles tilted his hat back an inch. No, stating the facts. You separate them. I ride to the territorial circuit by sundown. And they'll love hearing how you sell infants on Christmas morning. A man in the back crossed himself. Sheriff Grady swallowed. Judge, folks been complaining about your rulings already. Sheriff, the judge snapped, you keep your mouth shut. Noah whimpered again. Lydia drew him close, pressing her cheek against his tiny forehead. His skin was cold, too cold. She felt the tremble under his blanket, and something inside her cracked. Please, she whispered. She didn't know who she was speaking to. Miles, God, the walls, maybe all three. The judge opened his mouth to object, but Miles set a second leather pouch on the table. Even from where Lydia stood, she heard the weight of the coins inside. 150, he said. Final. Silence swallowed the courthouse. Vance's face twisted. You can't outbid me. I already did. The judge's fingers twitched around the gavel. Greed was louder than law, louder than morality, louder than the storm threatening to bury the town by nightfall. He slammed the gavel, hard, hard enough to crack the base. Sold, he barked. Mother and infant, together. Lydia's breath left her like someone had loosened the rope around her chest. Noah's cry softened into hiccups. Miles finally turned to her. Winter blue eyes, steady, unreadable. Ma'am, he said softly, gather your things. We leave now. Her voice barely rose. I have no things. Miles's jaw tightened once, like the answer hurt more than it should have. He didn't comment, didn't pity, just nodded. Then we leave faster. The judge stamped the bill of sale, pushing it toward Miles with a trembling hand. Transaction complete. She's your property now. Lydia flinched as if struck. Miles didn't take the paper immediately. His gaze cut to the judge with a calm so sharp it bordered on violent. She's not property, he said. She's under my protection. Write that instead. That's not... Write it. The judge scribbled something quickly, unwilling to test a man who had just dropped more money than any rancher in Colorado carried in winter. Miles finally picked up the document, folded it, and tucked it into his coat. Then he stepped back, creating space so Lydia could pass without brushing him. She hesitated. Barely. Then she shifted Noah to her other arm and walked forward. Past the judge, past the men who had priced her life, past the open door where the wind cut like a warning. Miles followed her into the snow. Behind them, Vance hissed, "You'll regret this, Callahan." Miles didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The storm was already answering for him. Snow swallowed Lydia's footsteps before she could make the second one. The wind howled down Main Street, lifting torn flyers, rattling shutters, dragging the cold straight through her threadbare dress. Noah whimpered against her shoulder, his breath feathering weak and warm for half a second before the air stole it away. Miles matched her pace without touching her, close enough to shield them from the wind, far enough to give her room to breathe. Sheriff Grady jogged after them, hat nearly torn from his hand. "Miles, hold up!" Miles didn't. "We're leaving town, Sheriff." "You can't just take her." "I bought her under your judge's law," Miles said, voice steady as iron. "And I'll undo that sin myself when we're clear of this place." Lydia almost stumbled. Undo? I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to. Vance pushed through the courthouse doors behind them, coat flapping like a black flag. "Sheriff, stop them! I've got new papers coming in any minute." Grady paled. "Miles, stay put till I sort this." "You had your chance." Miles kept walking, and Lydia, slow, frozen, terrified, found herself caught in a world that moved like two forces grinding stone. Vance shouting, Sheriff wavering, Miles striding through the storm as if God had hung a lantern in front of him alone. They reached the hitching post. Two horses waited, breath steaming, restless under the slicing wind, and behind them, a wagon, small, battered canvas top flapping. Miles stepped to the wagon bed, pulling the canvas aside. His voice softened, not gentle, not warm, but steady. "Ma'am, put the child here. Ropes'll hold him steady." She hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to hand Noah over, not to trust any man's arrangement. Miles didn't rush her. He just checked the knots himself, pulling each one with a gloved hand. Snow collected on his shoulders, unmoving, as if even the storm refused to push him. Finally, Lydia slid Noah into the straw-lined cradle. The child whimpered once, then curled into the cloth as the warmth of the wagon's lantern began to seep through. Vance's voice cut through the wind. "You can't ride out. Judge said new writ's coming." Miles turned his head slightly, not enough to acknowledge the man fully, just enough so Vance saw the edge of his stare. "Then let it chase us." A rush of panic climbed Lydia's throat. "Miles," Sheriff Grady warned, "the territory won't like—" "They'll like it less," Miles replied, "when they hear what you let happen this morning." Grady's shoulders slumped. He didn't stop them again. Miles moved to help Lydia climb into the wagon, but she flinched before his hand touched the rail. He froze, took his hand back, gave her a small nod. "You climb? I'll follow." So she did, awkward, numb, trembling, using muscles that barely listened. The boards were icy, her fingers slipped. For one terrifying second, she nearly fell backward. Miles's arm shot out, not touching her, but bracing against the side so she had something to lean into without being held. She made it in. Barely. Miles stepped up after her, pulled the canvas down, and signaled Raphael and Tomas, who had appeared from the shadows between buildings. Both men nodded. One mounted, the other took the reins. The wagon lurched forward. The first turn out of town was a battle. Wind slamming the wheels, snow piling in ridges, the horses struggling for footing. Lydia gripped the wooden beams, teeth chattering hard enough her jaw ached. Noah whimpered again. Lydia bent over him, shielding him with her body. Miles shifted closer, not touching, just enough to brace a hand on the opposite beam, keeping the wagon balanced as it rattled over a frozen rut. "You'll be warm soon," he murmured, almost to Noah, almost to himself. Outside, someone shouted. A rider tearing out of the courthouse yard, waving a sheet of paper like a white flag of war. "Callahan, stop! New writ!" The wagon didn't stop. Tomas cracked the reins hard. The horses lunged. Snow sprayed into the air like shattered glass. Lydia's breath stuttered. Not from fear she already knew too well, but from the realization that she was no longer running alone. God, don't let this hope kill me too. Miles looked out through the slit in the canvas, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed against the storm and the law and the men who would carve mother from child if given half a breath. "Ma'am," he said quietly, never looking away from the road. "Hold on to him. We're not safe yet." And the wagon plunged into the white hell waiting beyond the last building of town, taking Lydia Hale, her child, and the man who'd declared himself a father into a storm that promised nothing but danger and movement. The storm didn't break. It simply changed shape. Less wind, more weight. Snow thickened into a curtain that swallowed the road, the horses, the sky. By the time the wagon creaked through the split fence of Miles Callahan's ranch, Lydia couldn't feel her toes. Noah cried in thin, exhausted squeaks that barely rose above the groan of the wheels. Raphael jumped down first, lantern held high. "Senor, barn's clear. House fire's low but holding." Miles nodded once. "Get the doors open." Lydia blinked through the stinging cold. The ranch wasn't large, but it stood like something that had weathered storms long before she'd ever learned fear had a voice. Smoke curled from the chimney. A single lantern burned in the kitchen window. It felt wrong to trust a light in this world. I've chased lights that led me straight into traps. Miles climbed out, boots crunching deep. He lifted the canvas flap for Lydia, not touching her, just holding it out of the way so no snow dropped on Noah. "Ma'am, inside." Lydia pulled Noah close and climbed down. Her legs shook. The cold had burrowed up her bones and settled there like a tenant. Miles walked beside her, but did not steady her. She wasn't sure if she hated him more for that, or was grateful. Raphael swung the house door open. Heat spilled out. Thin, not much, but enough to sting her frozen skin. She stepped over the threshold. The room was small, bare, honest. Miles shut the door behind them, snow still clinging to his hat. He didn't say welcome. He didn't say safe. He said one word. "Sit." Lydia stayed standing. Miles didn't push it. He walked to the fireplace, knelt, and fed 2 logs onto the embers. Flames rose, bright enough for Lydia to see the hard lines in his face soften beneath the glow. He didn't look at her when he spoke, but every word was aimed at the rope still wound around her soul. "I made a transaction in that courthouse," he said, "but I don't keep people." Lydia's throat tightened. Noah whimpered. She rocked gently, more out of instinct than choice. Miles pulled a folded paper from his coat and placed it on the table. The table creaked under the weight. "Your contract," he said. "Employment, wages, room, board, your own key. No one opens your door unless you say so, not me, not them." Lydia didn't move toward the paper. Miles finally looked at her. "You're not property here, ma'am. You get to leave when you choose." A pause. "And if you choose." The room went quiet enough to hear snow ticking against the window panes. Lydia edged forward. Not trust, just necessity. She laid Noah on the chair closest to the fire, her hand still on his chest, feeling each breath like she'd count it forever. Then she looked at the paper. Lines of words blurred from the heat rising from the hearth. Wages, boundaries, rights, provisions, all neat, all legal, all unbelievable. She reached for the pen, but not to sign. She turned the paper sideways, dipped the pen, and wrote 3 additional lines. Her handwriting shook, but it didn't break. Miles watched her without interrupting. Lydia pushed the paper back toward him, chin lifted an inch. "These," she said softly, "or it's not a contract." Miles read them silently. 1. Mother and child stay together under all circumstances. 2. Statement, I'm dad grants no ownership, only protection. 3. If I choose to leave, I depart with money owed and 1 horse. He looked up. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. A quiet, low acknowledgement. "Fair," he said. He signed first. A single sharp motion, ink scratching across the paper like a blade finding purpose. Then he handed the pen back. Lydia hesitated. "I've signed things that ruined me." But Noah breathed weak, warm little breaths against her palm, and survival doesn't wait for trust. She signed. Not with hope, with intention. Miles folded the paper, handed her the duplicate. "Yours. Keep it close." Lydia tucked it inside her dress, near her ribs, near the place that hurt most. The house creaked as Tomas shut the barn door outside. Miles stood. "You and the boy take the back room. I'll sleep near the fire." Lydia stiffened. "I didn't ask for—" "It's not charity," Miles cut in. "It's the only warm room, and he needs the warmth more than I do." Noah whimpered. Lydia gathered him up. She stepped toward the hallway, but something made her pause. One last question sitting on her tongue like a splinter. "Miles, why do all this?" He didn't answer the way a man answers. He answered the way a wound remembers. "When God gives you one more chance to do the right thing," he said quietly, "you take it, before he changes his mind." The storm howled at the walls. Lydia walked into the back room, and for the first time in months, fear wasn't the only thing following her. Morning came slow. Gray light seeped through the frost-bitten window, thin as a blade. Lydia barely slept. Noah drifted in and out, tiny fists curling against her chest each time the wind rattled the shutters. The ranch was quiet. Too quiet. Miles stepped in only long enough to leave a bowl of warm broth on the table. No words, no questions, just a nod toward Noah before he disappeared through the front door. Lydia watched the bowl steam. Kindness always scared me more than cruelty. Cruelty was predictable. Outside, hooves crunched over frozen dirt. Voices, low, tense. She pulled Noah close and moved toward the crack in the doorframe. Sheriff Grady stood on the porch, hat in both hands. Miles faced him, back straight, coat still dusted with snow. "Miles," Grady said, "Judge Pritchard's spreading word. Claims you used improper means at the auction. That you," he swallowed, "claimed paternity to obstruct the court." Miles didn't blink. Did he mention the part where he tried to sell a child? Folks don't hear that version. Grady looked troubled, like a man holding a rope tied to both heaven and hell. Lydia's pulse hammered. Noah stirred at her shoulder. She stepped back, away from the draft sneaking under the door. Grady continued, voice low. "Miles, people are saying you abducted her, that you forged a claim." Lydia's breath hitched. "Abducted? I've been stolen before. I know how that story ends." Miles didn't raise his voice. "You know that's a lie." "I do," Grady said. "But politics don't care. Judge filed a preliminary charge. I'm required to verify the situation." Miles held out his hand. "Then put it in writing." "What?" "In writing," Miles repeated. "Questions, claims, notices, all of it. You want to talk to her? You file it first." Grady stared at him like the man had begun speaking a different language. Law usually worked in whispers here, not paper. But Miles didn't move, didn't soften. Grady sighed and nodded. "I'll return with paperwork. But Miles..." His eyes flicked toward the house. "Be ready." He mounted and rode off, his horse leaving a trail of unease behind. Miles stepped back inside. Lydia slid away from the door like she hadn't been listening, though her heart still thundered as if she'd run miles across the plains. He didn't ask what she heard. She didn't offer. Silence held them both like a fragile truce. Miles set a worn ledger on the table. "Rumors spread faster than truth. Vance is buying mouths." Lydia wrapped Noah tighter. "And what does that mean for us?" "It means," Miles said, flipping the ledger open, "we gather our own truth." He tapped the page. "Raphael and Tomas know people in town. Maylin keeps records from the boarding house. Debts, labor exchanges, names Pritchard tried to hide." Lydia stiffened. "You're going after the judge." "I'm going after what's mine to fix." She almost lashed back. "We're not yours." But the words tangled on her tongue. Noah shifted in her arms. The warmth of him anchored her anger. Instead, she walked to the coat hook, hung her thin shawl, then returned to face Miles fully. "And if your truth isn't enough?" she asked quietly. Miles didn't flinch. "Then I'll buy time." "With money?" "With whatever the law lets me wield. A beat. And nothing it forbids." Lydia studied him. Firelight carved shadows under his eyes, turning them darker, deeper. There was no bravado in his words, only the weight of a man who had already paid for something long before she entered his life. A sharp whistle cut through the air outside. Tomas rushed in, breath white, eyes alert. "Señor, someone's near the east fence, watching." Miles didn't look surprised. "Judge's men." Lydia felt Noah's tiny fingers grip the fabric of her dress. Instinct coiled tight inside her chest. Tomas added, "Tracks lead toward the ridge. They're waiting for nightfall." Miles turned to Lydia. Rumors are one thing. Surveillance is another. They're preparing something. Lydia swallowed hard. Another writ? Maybe worse. She tightened the blanket around Noah. Fear didn't take shape in her chest. It took motion. She moved to the table, laid out the contract Miles had signed, traced the edges as if it were a boundary she could rebuild with her fingertips. Miles didn't stop her, didn't touch her, just stood near enough that she felt the gravity of his presence. Then she looked up. Don't pay them off. Don't bribe anyone. The moment you do, they own us again. Miles nodded once, solemn, like accepting a vow made in a church pew. Then we do this the hard way, he said, the clean way. Outside, wind scraped against the walls like fingernails. Snow drifted sideways in long, bitter streaks. Inside, the fire caught a new log. Lydia didn't trust Miles Callahan, but for the first time she trusted the space between them, the place where choices were made with open eyes. And the storm outside felt suddenly smaller than the storm coming for them. By late afternoon, the storm had quieted, but the air had sharpened, the kind of cold that made breath crack in the lungs. Lydia stood at the kitchen window, rocking Noah slowly, while her eyes traced the dark tree line behind the barn. Something had been moving there since morning. Not animal, not wind. A man watching. Inside the house, Miles strapped on his gun belt, not for a fight, but the way a man buckles a truth to his waist. Tomas threw the door open before he could speak. Rider coming. Miles didn't move from the table. One or two? Just one, senor, but carrying papers. Lydia's heart punched upward into her throat. The knock came hard. 3 strikes, no courtesy. Sheriff Grady stepped inside without waiting for the invitation. His beard was crusted with frost, his expression worse. Callahan, he muttered, you're not gonna like this. Miles didn't blink. Say it. Grady unfolded a document with stiff fingers, like the paper itself offended him. Judge Pritchard issued an order for the birth record of the infant. He exhaled sharply. He says the child's status must be reviewed for custodial reassignment. Custodial reassignment. A phrase colder than the snow. Lydia pressed Noah closer. His tiny cheek warmed the hollow beneath her collarbone. I've lost too much already. I won't lose him. Miles stepped forward. What happens if she doesn't hand over the birth record? Grady answered like a man reading from a script he hated. She'd be charged with concealing a minor, and the child would be taken to temporary holding at the mission. Temporary, Miles repeated flatly. Grady sighed. You know damn well how long temporary lasts under Pritchard. Lydia's knees weakened. She grabbed the edge of the table, steadying herself. Noah let out a soft cry, his fingers tugging at her dress, like he could pull her away from the entire world. Miles didn't look at Lydia, didn't ask permission. He reached for another document, clean paper, fresh ink, and placed it in front of the sheriff. What's that? Grady asked. My declaration, Miles said. I assume full legal responsibility for the child until parentage is clarified. Lydia jerked her head up. Miles! He still didn't look at her. His voice was a steel bar wedged under a collapsing roof. You said the judge wants a guardian on record. Fine. Put me on record. Grady stared. Callahan, if you sign that, you're stuck in this mess. Can't claim you just bought labor anymore. You become liable, investigable. Hell, they'll drag your name across every church pew in the county. Miles held the pen like a verdict. Good, he said. Let them. The pen scratched the page. The sound cut Lydia open in places words never reached. He slid the signed paper toward Grady. Add a line, Lydia said suddenly. Her voice surprised even herself. She stepped forward, shifting, Noah to her other arm, hand trembling but controlled. Grady blinked. Add what, Miss Hale? This. She spoke without wavering. Mother remains the infant's direct caregiver under all circumstances. Grady hesitated, looked at Miles. Miles nodded. Write it. Grady wrote. Lydia steadied her breathing. I've been silent too long. Not this time. When the ink dried, Grady folded the document. I'll file this by nightfall. It'll stall Pritchard, for now. But understand. His gaze flicked between them. You've drawn blood with this move. He'll come harder. Miles replied quietly. So will we. Grady left. The wind swallowed him. The house fell still. Only the fire crackled, and Noah's soft breath brushed Lydia's collarbone. She turned to Miles, words caught somewhere between gratitude and terror. Miles, why would you tie yourself to us like that? He finally looked at her. Not with softness, with truth. Because you shouldn't have to fight the law alone, not while holding a child. She swallowed, throat tight. And what does this make you now? She whispered. Miles's jaw clenched, not with pride, but with the acceptance of a burden he'd chosen. It makes me, he said, responsible. The fire popped. Noah shifted. And outside in the tree line, the watcher moved closer. They didn't have long to breathe. By sunrise, the watcher in the trees was gone. But his tracks, long, deliberate, doubled back twice, cut a pattern that spoke one thing. Someone had been measuring the ranch. Miles saw it first. Tomas saw it second. Lydia saw it last, when she stepped out to shake a blanket and froze at the sight of those footprints trailing towards our town. Noah stirred against her shoulder. She tightened her hold and stepped back inside. The knock came moments later, fast, sharp, nervous. Mei Lin stood on the porch, cheeks raw from the cold, clutching a folded scrap of paper in her shaking hand. Miss Lydia, she whispered. They're digging. Deep. Miles opened the door wider. Come inside. No time. Her breath fogged between them. Judge sent Vance to the boarding house this morning. He paid old Harmon to testify you stole milk rations, said you broke into the pantry, left without paying the room fees. Lydia felt heat spike under her ribs. Pain, not anger. Stole. I scrubbed floors till my hands bled. Mei Lin thrust the paper into Miles's hand. I wrote down every shift she worked, every dish washed, every hour traded for that room. She looked at Lydia then, eyes burning. You paid for every night you spent there. Don't let them twist it. Lydia's fingers tightened around Noah until he fussed. Miles skimmed the note, handwriting tight, hurried, desperate. Thank you, he said. We'll use this. No, Mei Lin replied, voice breaking. You'll need it. They're planning something bigger. Before Miles could ask what, she was already backing down the steps, eyes darting toward town, as if the walls themselves had ears. When she disappeared down the trail, Miles shut the door and turned to Lydia. "They're setting up a character strike," he said. "They want you in front of the judge again." Lydia laid Noah in the chair by the fire, then straightened slowly, her spine stiff, her breath controlled. "What happens if I don't show?" "They issue a warrant," Miles said. "You'd be taken. Noah, too." Lydia's mouth went dry. "What happens if I do show?" she asked. Miles hesitated. That told her enough. "They'll try to paint you as unfit," he said, "and they'll try to make me look like a man who—" His jaw flexed. "Paid for more than labor." Lydia felt her pulse stutter. Cold, sharp, cutting inward. Noah whimpered. She moved to pick him up, but Miles stepped back instinctively, giving her space. She rocked the baby twice, steadying them both, then looked up. "I'll go," she said. The words surprised even her. Miles frowned. "You don't need to walk into their trap." "Yes," she said, voice low but unwavering. "I do. If I'm going to keep Noah, I cannot run from the law, even when the law is rotten." Miles opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "Hide me," she said, "and they'll call me fugitive. Fight for me, and they'll say you bought a woman." Her fingers brushed Noah's hair. "But if I stand there myself, they'll have to look me in the eyes when they lie." The room fell silent except for Noah's soft breathing. Miles stepped closer, not touching her, just near enough that the warmth from the fire caught both of their shadows. "Then we go together," he said. She shook her head. "No, I go with Noah. You bring the papers." "The papers won't matter without me." Her voice cracked, just once. "And I won't matter without him." Something softened in Miles's expression. Not pity, not sympathy, but recognition. A man who'd lost someone once could see the shape of loss before it formed. He exhaled slowly. "Then I ride beside you, and I won't raise a hand unless you ask me to." Lydia nodded, shoulders trembling. The truth was simple. "I'm tired of running, and more tired of being hunted." She wrapped Noah in her shawl and tucked the contract into her bodice. A shield of paper, thin, fragile, but it was something she owned. When she stepped outside to saddle the horse, the cold hit her like a wall. Already the sky was paling toward another storm. Miles was tightening the cinch on his own saddle, jaw set, movements sharp. Tomas handed him a packet. Folded receipts, the contract, Maylin's note, the declaration Miles had signed with his own name. "Everything you need, senor." Miles tucked it inside his coat. Lydia swung onto her horse awkwardly, legs stiff, hands shaking. But she didn't fall. She didn't ask for help. Miles mounted beside her. "Stay close," he said. "I'm not the one they want to separate from my child," she answered. And with that, they rode toward town. Toward the courthouse where lies were waiting. Toward a judge sharpening words like knives. Toward a past Lydia thought she'd buried under miles of dirt and grief. The wind picked up. Snow lifted. And somewhere deep in her bones, Lydia understood. This fight would not end with truth. It would end with someone breaking first. And she refused to be the one who broke. The courthouse looked smaller in winter. Meaner, too. Frost clung to the windows like hands trying to escape. Lydia tightened Noah against her chest as she crossed the yard, Miles walking half a step behind her, close enough to shield the wind, far enough not to claim space that wasn't his. People turned to stare. Women whispered. Men narrowed their eyes. Rumor had arrived long before they did. Inside, the courtroom smelled of damp wood and coal that never burned hot enough. Judge Pritchard sat high above them, robes draped like a shroud, the gavel beside him placed just so, like a weapon waiting for an excuse. Vance Kerrigan leaned on the rail, smirking. "Mornin', Miss Hale. Brought the baby too?" "Brave." Lydia didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the empty bench where witnesses stood. Miles placed the folder of documents on their table. "Stay behind me when they call the writ," he murmured. "I'm not hiding," she whispered back. "And I'm done being spoken for." The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Pritchard tapped his gavel once, lightly, but the sound traveled like thunder across a frozen lake. "We reconvene," he said, voice oily, "to assess the credibility and character of Lydia Hale, formerly of Harmon's boarding house." Lydia kept her breath steady. Noah stirred, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her coat. Pritchard nodded toward Vance. "You may bring your witness." Old Harmon shuffled forward, hat in hand, eyes darting everywhere except toward Lydia. He coughed, cleared his throat, looked down at his boots. "State your claim," the judge said. Harmon's voice quavered. "Miss Hale. She left owing fees, took milk from the pantry, broke the rules. Hard to trust someone what steals." Lydia felt the room tilt. "I scrubbed those floors till my hands cracked." Miles didn't move, didn't speak. He simply laid the contract on the table. Flat. Undeniable. "Mr. Harmon," Pritchard said, "is your testimony given freely?" Vance coughed a warning sound behind him. Harmon flinched. Before he could speak again, the courtroom doors slammed open. Everyone turned. May Lynn stood there, snow on her shoulders, breath ragged, holding a book, the boarding house ledger, tight to her chest. "Judge," she said, voice shaking, but unbroken, "your witness forgot half the story." Pritchard scowled. "This is irregular." "It's true," May Lynn cut in. "Miss Hale worked for every meal, every night. Dishes, floors, laundry. She paid for the milk she used for her child." She held up the ledger, pages trembling. His handwriting, his receipts, his signature. Vance's face darkened. Harmon began to shake. "Judge, sir, it's—" "Sit down," Pritchard snapped. But Sheriff Grady stepped forward. "Judge, if there's contradictory evidence, I need to review it." Pritchard shot him a look sharp enough to cut. "Sheriff, I remind you who presides over this court." Grady didn't back down. "And I remind you, Judge, that evidence belongs to the law, not your convenience." A crack formed in the room, the smallest shift in power, barely visible, but real. Miles opened the folder. He slid forward. The contract Lydia signed, the declaration naming him temporary guardian, the work records from the ranch, May Lynn's ledger note. Pritchard refused to touch them. "Our time is short," he said. "I will issue my ruling in 72 hours. 72. Long enough for Vance to move freely. Long enough for another writ to be forged." The judge stood. The gavel slammed. Court dismissed. People rustled out like vultures leaving a carcass picked clean. Vance lingered by the rail, eyes predatory. 72 hours, Callahan, he murmured. Plenty of time to finish what the auction started. Miles didn't answer. His silence was a drawn gun. Lydia gathered Noah, her legs wooden beneath her. She walked past Vance without flinching. Outside, cold hit her like a blow. The sky had darkened again. Snow thickened, drifting sideways across the yard. Miles stepped to her side. We bought time, not safety. She nodded, breath trembling in the air. He's coming, isn't he? Miles looked toward the horizon where riders sometimes appeared like ghosts through the white. He will bring papers, Miles said. His jaw tightened. And men. Lydia held Noah tighter. 72 hours. A clock hung over their lives now, and every second belonged to someone who wanted to take her child. She whispered into Noah's hair, so quietly the wind nearly stole it away. Lord, don't let them win. Snow fell sideways that night, a steady white curtain closing around the ranch. Lydia barely slept. Every creak in the walls felt like footsteps. Every gust against the window sounded like a fist ready to break glass. Miles stayed awake by the fire, boots on, coat still on his shoulders, eyes half open but alert. A man listening for danger he already expected. Just before dawn, the horses screamed. Lydia bolted upright. Noah whimpered, sensing the crackle of fear more than the cold. Tomas burst through the front door. Riders, he panted. 4, maybe 5, coming fast from town. Miles was already on his feet. Pritchard sent them. Lydia felt the floor tilt. 72 hours. He didn't even wait one. The riders didn't knock, didn't shout warning. They slammed the door open with the confidence of men who believed they already owned what they came for. Vance stepped in first, snow on his collar, breath steaming like something feral. Behind him, 2 deputies and a third man holding a sealed document stamped in red wax. Morning, Vance sneered. We're here for the woman and the child. Miles didn't reach for his gun. He didn't need to. His presence alone stiffened the air. You're early, Miles said, voice low. Judge expedited, Vance replied, lifting the paper. New writ. Miss Hale is classified as property under contested debt. The infant, he smiled, is to be taken into protective custody while the court sorts out parentage. Lydia stepped back instinctively, Noah tightening his tiny fingers into her dress. The third man broke the seal and read, By order of Judge Pritchard, the woman Lydia Hale shall be held pending debt inquiry. The child, No, Miles said. The man swallowed. Shall be transferred to the mission until guardianship is assigned. Lydia's breath died in her throat. They were going to separate them. Today. Now. By force of paper and cold men with cold eyes. Vance extended his hand. Come on, Miss Hale. You know how this works. Lydia didn't move. Couldn't. My body knows this terror too well. Deputies, Vance barked. Take the child first. Makes the mother easier. Miles stepped between them and Lydia so fast the deputies flinched. You try to touch that boy, Miles said, and your judge will be praying for a miracle before sunset. One deputy reached for his holster. Tomas appeared behind him, rifle raised, not aimed, but ready. Raphael stood outside the door, blocking the exit with a quiet, deadly certainty. Vance lifted his hands in mock peace. No need for theatrics. It's legal business, Callahan. We're not kidnapping. You forged that seal, Miles said. Vance blinked. Prove it. Miles turned to the deputy holding the writ. Let me see the mark. The man hesitated. Miles didn't. He took one step forward, controlled, heavy, absolute authority, and the deputy folded, handing the document over, like a child surrendering stolen candy. Miles held the writ to the firelight. His jaw locked. The territory seal is cut wrong, he said. Your judge carved a new die. The deputies shifted nervously. Even they knew the consequences of forging federal authority. Vance shrugged. Prove it in court. Meanwhile, he snapped his fingers. Bring the girl. Noah cried. A sudden sharp wail that tore through the room like a blade of sound. Lydia's arms closed around him, her body curling instinctively, a shield of flesh and desperation. Miles stepped closer, voice quiet but lethal. Lydia, show me the contract. Her hands shook as she pulled it from her bodice and passed it to him. Miles didn't unfold it. He held it up between them and the deputies like scripture. She's not property, he said. She's under employment protection, and the child is under my temporary guardianship, signed before the sheriff and filed. The deputies looked at each other. Doubt spread. Then Vance played his final card. Judge also included a clause, he said, revoking temporary guardianship due to conflict of interest. His grin widened. Seems your I'm dad stunt made you look compromised. Miles went still. The room froze with him. Lydia's heart slammed against her ribs. Noah wailed again, his face buried in her shoulder. Vance leaned in. Hand her over, Callahan. You can keep playing hero later. Lydia felt something break inside. A thin, fraying strand between hope and collapse. Miles turned to her. Just his eyes. Nothing else. Then he spoke a sentence that changed the air itself. There's one way, he said softly, to cut you out of their property laws forever. Lydia stared at him. Breath suspended, knees weak. Vance frowned. What the hell are you? Miles didn't look away from her. Marriage, he said. Legal, immediate, with witnesses. The room inhaled sharply. Lydia felt the weight of the moment settle onto her like a cloak of fire and ice. Marriage. Not for love, not for want, for survival, for Noah. Her pulse raced so violently she thought her body might fail her. Miles lowered his voice. You choose it, or you lose him. Tears burned behind Lydia's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I won't be bought again, but I won't hand my child to wolves. She took one step toward Miles, small, barely a breath, but enough to shatter Vance's smirk. Get a minister, she whispered. Miles nodded once, a vow forged in silence. Vance exploded. This is a joke. Sheriff won't recognize. But it was too late. Miles was grabbing his coat. Tomas and Raphael were already moving. The deputies backed up, startled by the sudden shift in power. Lydia clutched Noah and stepped into the cold night behind Miles. Snow hit her face like needles, and she realized something terrifying. She had just chosen war, and marriage was the weapon. The wind met them like a wall, hard, punishing, full of needles. Snow sliced sideways across the yard, As Miles pulled Lydia toward the waiting horses, Tomas already saddling the second mount with trembling fingers. "Raphael!" Miles shouted over the storm. "Hold them off long as you can." Raphael nodded, jaw set. "Go, I stay." Lydia held Noah beneath her coat, shielding his tiny face from the cold with her own body. Her breath fogged against his hair. Her hands stung. Her legs shook. God, I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Miles swung onto his horse in one fluid motion, then reached down, not touching her, just lowering his arm where she could take it if she chose. She didn't take it. She hauled herself up alone. He didn't comment. Didn't look away either. "Hold tight," he said. The horses plunged forward, hooves cracking through crusts of ice as the storm swallowed the world ahead. Trees bent under the weight of heavy white. The road blurred into nothing. "Preacher Avery's cabin," Miles called out. 3 miles east." "3 miles in this?" Lydia whispered. 3 miles between you and losing him." The words hit harder than the wind. Behind them, faint shouts carried from the ranch, Vance's men realizing the plan and scrambling to mount their own pursuit. The storm thickened. Branches snapped. The world shrank to the space between Miles's back and Lydia's pounding heart. Noah whimpered. Lydia tucked him tighter. The cold burned through her coat like a warning. "Miles," she said, voice trembling. "If I fall—" "You won't," he answered. "How do you know?" He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. "Because I won't let you." The storm roared, swallowing whatever else he meant. By the time they reached the ridge, Lydia's fingers were numb, her face raw with windburn, her breath thin enough to crack. Miles slowed the horse. "There," he said. A small cabin crouched beneath a snow-heavy pine. Warm light flickered through the window, weak but real. Miles dismounted first, boots sinking deep into drifts. He came to her side, holding the horse steady while she slid off. Lydia staggered, knees buckling. He steadied the saddle, not her. Close, protective, but never crossing her lines. Preacher Avery opened the door just as they reached it, lantern in hand. His brows shot up at the sight of Lydia clutching a child, hair frozen to her cheeks, Miles grim as judgment behind her. "By the Lord," Avery breathed. "What storm dragged you out at this hour?" Miles didn't waste time. "We need a wedding, now." Avery blinked. "Is this forced? Miss Hale, do you agree?" Lydia lifted her chin. The wind howled, snow whipped her skirt. "I choose it," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but the strength stood. Avery stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the cabin was small, warm, smelling of pine and old books. Lydia carried Noah to a chair by the fire. His face softened in the heat, tiny fists unfurling. The relief nearly broke her. Miles removed his hat, but not his coat. His breath steamed. His eyes stayed on Lydia. Avery opened a drawer and pulled out a worn marriage ledger. "Normally," he said, "there'd be time for witnesses, vows, prayer." "We have witnesses," Miles interrupted. Tomas burst through the door just then, panting from the ride. "They follow," he warned, "minutes behind." Miles nodded once. "2 witnesses. That's legal." Avery dipped his quill. "Names?" "Lydia Hale," she said, voice steadier now, "and Miles Callahan." Avery wrote. He turned to Miles. Do you take this woman under God's law? Yes, Miles said. The speed of it almost startled her. No hesitation, no breath between question and vow. Avery turned to Lydia. Do you take this man? Lydia's throat tightened. Noah stirred. Snow slammed the window like a fist. I do, she whispered. Avery signed the ledger. Thomas signed beneath it. He handed Miles the marriage certificate. And in that moment, before the ink dried, before the storm eased, before Vance's men reached the ridge, Lydia felt something strange rush through her chest. Not safety, not trust, but a thin thread of strength she hadn't known she still possessed. Miles folded the certificate, slipped it into his coat near his heart. Let's go, he said. Avery lifted a hand. Callahan, take care. The law may not respect this union. Miles met his eyes. It will when I'm done. Outside, hooves thundered in the distance. Lydia tightened her grip on Noah. Miles pushed open the cabin door. Snow tore inward. The storm hadn't eased. It had teeth now, and men riding inside it. The storm left the ranch buried in white. Silence pressed against the windows, thick as wool. Miles stood on the porch with his hat low, watching the empty road as if waiting for a sentence he already knew was coming. Behind him, Lydia stepped out. Noah slept against her chest, quilt pulled high, tiny breath warming the hollow beneath her throat. They'll come today, she said. They will, Miles answered. They want an audience. They want a show. Snow cracked in the distance. Hooves. Slow, deliberate. Raphael whistled from the bunkhouse roof. A warning cut into 3 sharp notes. Miles stepped into the yard. Lydia followed, stopping halfway down the porch steps. Her spine looked carved from something harder than fear. Sheriff Grady arrived first, then Vance Kerrigan, then Judge Pritchard. 3 riders cutting through the pale light like dark stones rolling downhill. They dismounted. Callahan, the sheriff said tiredly. Miles didn't answer. Judge Pritchard lifted a red-sealed writ like a preacher holding scripture. We're here to reclaim property tied to contested estate debt. The woman and the infant. Lydia's breath caught. Say that word again, she whispered. Property. Pritchard ignored her. Step aside. Miles didn't. Instead, he gestured. Raphael. The vaquero crossed the yard and placed a leather folder into Miles's hand. Miles opened it and laid the employment contract on a barrel between them. Legal contract. Signed. Witnessed. She works here. She is not property. Sheriff Grady nodded. I've seen this one. Pritchard's mouth tightened. Contracts don't erase debt. Miles didn't blink. That's why we brought more. He laid down Mei Lin's ledger. Ink-stained, creased, honest. It shows Lydia Hale paid every room and meal with labor or coin. The debt Vance claims doesn't exist. Vance scoffed. You trust a laundress? A voice cut through the cold. Trust me more than you. Mei Lin marched into the yard, shawl tight, breath white, eyes burning. She slammed her notebook onto the barrel. That's every hour she worked, she said. Every dish, every stitch, every night she paid for. The judge scowled. This is irregular. You're irregular, Maylin snapped. 4 widows, 7 children sold off your paper, all stamped wrong. Silence rippled outward. Miles pulled out the final sheet, the marriage certificate. Signed by Reverend Avery, 2 witnesses. Lydia Hale Callahan is no longer tied to any estate you're pretending to chase. Pritchard barked, "Coerced! Arranged under duress!" Miles shook his head. "Ask her." All eyes turned. Lydia stepped forward. She didn't lower her gaze, didn't hide behind Miles. Noah stirred in her arms, tiny fingers curling against her coat. "I asked him," she said. "I put the paper under his hand. I told him to sign." Vance's smirk died. Sheriff Grady looked at the judge, really looked at him. The red wax, the wrong seal, the dates, the pattern. "Judge," Grady said slowly, "why weren't these estate auctions ever reported to the territorial office? By law, they must be." "Paperwork delays," Pritchard muttered. 4 times? Grady's voice hardened. 4 widows, 7 children, none stamped right, all sold under your gavel. The air changed. Even the snow seemed to listen. Vance's hand twitched toward his coat. Raphael's rifle lifted without hesitation. "Don't," Raphael murmured. Pritchard snapped at Grady. "Arrest them. Callahan for obstruction, the woman for fraud." Grady didn't move. He looked at Lydia, her cracked hands, the quilt protecting Noah, the thin line of strength holding her upright. Then he looked at Miles, the papers, the truth, the quiet readiness. Finally, he looked at Pritchard, and he made his choice. He stepped forward and ripped the writ from the judge's hand. Folded it once. Twice. "The seal's wrong," Grady said. "This writ is fraud." Pritchard sputtered. You answer to me!" "Not anymore," Grady replied. "By sheriff's authority, you're coming with me, for questioning, until the territorial office reviews this." Vance lunged. Raphael fired, the bullet shaving a post inches from Vance's head. Snow exploded in a white burst. Tomas grabbed Vance's arm, twisted, and the irons clicked shut around his wrists. The yard filled with the sound of surrender, the thud of defeat, the hiss of breath, the metallic bite of cuffs. Maylin exhaled softly, almost a prayer. Lydia's knees trembled, but she held. Miles gathered the papers, handed the contract back to her. "That's yours," he said quietly. She held it against her chest. "So what am I now? To them?" Miles didn't look at the judge or Vance being dragged away. He looked only at her. "To them," he said. "A problem they never expected to lose to." He paused. "To me, you're Lydia Hale Callahan, and nobody's property. Not today. Not ever again if I have breath left." Snow drifted around them, soft, relentless, erasing old tracks, waiting for new ones. The ranch held the kind of quiet that came only after violence. Too deep, too fragile, like the land itself waited to see if danger would return. Snow lay heavy on the fence rails. Smoke drifted from the chimney in a thin, wavering line. Miles stood in the yard watching the retreating silhouettes of the deputies dragging Judge Pritchard and Vance Kerrigan toward town. Sheriff Grady had muttered something about a territorial investigator arriving much sooner than anyone wanted. And then he too rode off, leaving the ranch alone with its bruised peace. Lydia stepped onto the porch. Noah nestled under her chin. The baby slept, soft breaths warming the collar of her dress. "Is it over?" she asked. Miles didn't turn. He watched the road like a man who no longer trusted stillness. "No," he said. "Trouble doesn't die when you beat it. It waits." Wind curled around them, lifting the hem of her skirt. Inside, Raphael and Tomas checked windows, loaded rifles, stacked wood. No celebration, no sighs of relief, just preparation. Lydia stepped back into the house. The warmth inside felt thin, real, but not yet safe. Miles followed her. Snow fell from his coat in quiet clumps. He removed his hat, placed it on the table beside the stack of papers that had saved her life. The contract, the ledger, their marriage certificate. "Sit," he said gently. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." He studied her, eyes red from cold, hair damp with melted snow, hands trembling around Noah. Then he moved to the hearth and knelt, building the fire higher. Lydia settled beside the flames, rocking Noah. When his tiny fingers curled around hers, her breath finally loosened. For a long minute, the only sound was fire snapping in the grate. Then Miles broke the silence. "We need to talk about what comes next." Lydia stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Pritchard isn't gone. Men like him don't fade. They adapt. They'll come after your name, your fitness as a mother, your past. They'll say you're unstable, lawless, anything to take Noah again. I've done nothing wrong. That won't matter." He didn't sugarcoat it. He never did. She looked at the contract on the table. Its edges curled slightly from constant handling. "What do we do?" Miles picked it up and held it out to her. "We change this," he said. "If you want." Lydia blinked. "Why me?" "Because it's yours," he said. "Because you deserve the right to shape your own life." The words cut through her like clean wind. She rose slowly, walked to the table, shifted Noah in her arm, and picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but her strokes did not. She wrote, "Convert employment contract to partnership contract. Joint management of ranch bookkeeping and supplies. Right to retain personal property regardless of marital disputes." She paused, then added, "Household decisions made with equal authority." It felt impossible to write. It felt necessary. She handed the paper to Miles. He signed without hesitation. Her chest tightened. No man had ever agreed to her terms. Not once. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Miles rested both hands on the table. The firelight caught the hard lines of his face, softening nothing. "Because I refuse to let the law use you as a weapon against yourself," he said. "And because you shouldn't have to live afraid of someone else's decision ever again." Her breath tore a little inside her chest. I didn't know how badly I needed to hear that. A rapid knock broke the moment. Raphael opened the door. A young messenger boy stood in the snow, cheeks red, coat too big. "Callahan?" he called. Miles stepped forward. "Here." The boy handed him a sealed envelope. "Ryder from the territorial office dropped this. Said it's urgent." Miles paid him. When the boy vanished into the storm, he unfolded the letter. Lydia watched his jaw tighten. What does it say? The investigator arrives within days, not weeks. Is that good? Depends on whether he's clean, Miles said. Fear flared in her chest. And if he's not? Then we stand anyway. The fire popped sharply, echoing the tension in her spine. Lydia walked to the window. Snow drifted across the valley, covering the judge's tracks like the land wanted to forget they ever existed. Do you think, she murmured, God gives you one more fight before he gives you peace? Miles stood beside her, not touching, not crowding, just present. Yes, he said, and I think this might be ours. She exhaled, watching breath fog the glass. What happens when he arrives? She asked. We present every ledger, every witness, every name of every woman and child Pritchard touched. We force daylight onto everything he buried. And if they try to twist it, then we hold harder. He spoke like a man who'd spent years losing battles he should have won, and a man determined not to lose this one. Lydia traced a finger over Noah's cheek. The baby stirred and settled, trusting arms that had never once failed him. Suddenly she turned toward Miles. Teach me to shoot, she said. Miles hesitated, not in disagreement, but in surprise. Lydia, if they come for him again, she said, voice steady, I want to stand between them and my child, with more than fear. Miles nodded once. At dawn. Raphael smirked from the doorframe. She'll shoot better than Kerrigan ever did. Most people do, Tomas muttered. Lydia allowed the smallest breath of a laugh. It felt raw, unfamiliar, dangerous, like a flame catching where there had been only ash for years. She stepped back to the fire, adjusting Noah's blanket, brushing snow from his tiny eyelids. Miles watched her in silence, not possessively, not with pity, but with understanding, shared, earned, incomplete. A knock of pine shifted in the stove. The wind keened against the house, but the walls held. Miles, she said quietly, what happens to us once all this is over? He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the table, picked up the marriage certificate, and held it without looking at it, feeling its weight like a truth he hadn't yet learned to carry. That depends, he said softly. Marriage is a paper. Family is a choice. Her breath trembled. And what choice have we made? Miles lifted his gaze. You chose Noah, he said. I chose to stand with you both. The rest, we build. Snow drifted past the window, soft and relentless, burying old tracks, waiting for new ones. Noah stirred, cooed, tucked his face against Lydia's neck. She held him gently. I might not know how to be a wife, she thought, but I know how to fight. And maybe that's enough to begin with. Miles moved to the window, keeping watch over the road and whatever future rode toward them with territorial authority. The ranch glowed with firelight, thin, trembling, stubborn against the cold. Outside, the valley waited. Inside, a new family breathed. Not safe, not whole, but standing. And somewhere beyond the tree line, a rider approached with judgment in one saddlebag and justice in the other. Winter wasn't finished with them, but neither were they finished with the world.